who is very experienced in the ways of of writing and running short D&D adventures. Shawn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, as Mike said, my name's Shawn Merwin, and I am indeed very practiced, if not good, in the ways of writing short adventures. I have done freelance work for Wizards of the Coast since 2001. I have worked for many companies, Kobold Press. I've got 2 projects for WotC, 2 for Kobold Press, 1 for Gamehole Con, and also working on Star Trek for Modifius, and that's just what I'm working on right now. So
yeah, that's like your current to-do list?
That's my list of things to do and not to mention Bald Man Games. So, yeah. I also work for Encoded Designs, a hippie gaming commune where we work on whatever the groups of us want to work on. And I have my own podcast too with Chris Nizak called Down with D&D.
Are you losing your sponsorship when they cut the National Endowments of the Arts? Your hippie commune?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. Nothing I work on can be considered art.
I would disagree with that. Having experienced many of the things that you've produced.
I don't think I get any federal funding.
No federal funding. That's possible. Well, certainly not now.
Right.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you coming on the show. As you know from the show, what I like to do is pick on one particular topic in this hobby of ours, and really dig into it and find somebody who's very experienced in this particular topic. You and I ran into each other in the one restaurant that anybody can eat at Winter Fantasy. So we chatted a bit there about the idea of short D&D adventures, which is something I've been very interested in. My own D&D adventures tend to be short. I run multiple sessions a week, but they're usually 2 to 3 hours instead of the very typical 4 hours. I think it's pretty safe to say that most D&D games tend to run 4 hours. Or I'd say of the times. How do I say it appropriately? Of any time that it takes to run a D&D, more people play 4 hours than any other specific time. But there's something kind of fascinating about really refining D&D down to an hour. I think in previous editions it might have been impossible to do so, and now it feels like, and I think as we talk, we'll discover more about what it's like to try to do it for the current edition. So to start off with, when did you first have to write a 1 hour adventure, and what was that experience like, and what was going through your head at the time?
It was probably the most terrifying thing I've ever been asked to do.
Yeah.
And the reason why was because it was right at the start of 5th edition. And they decided when they did the Adventurers League launch to make some regular 4-hour adventures, but also make these short 1-hour adventures that would introduce players to 5th edition, either people that are just playing it for the first time or people who've never played D&D before. So the Adventurers League folks came to me and said, could you work on this first adventure? We want them to be 5 1-hour adventures that can be played in any order, and that people will just, at Gen Con, will come, buy a ticket, get in line, play, and then leave, or if they want to play, get back in line and play the next one. And I thought, okay, that will be challenging, but let's give it a shot. And they said, well, now remember, this has to follow all of the living the Adventurers League rules. So, you have to use a certain amount of XP and a certain amount of treasure. And I'm like, it'll make it a little harder, but we're okay. We can do that. And then they continued to heap on these. Now, it has to be done in an hour. It can't be an hour and 1 minute because we need to rotate players through.
Right.
And I'm thinking, well, there's paperwork going to be involved. There's going to be getting people to the table, sit down, take out the... So now we're talking really 45 minutes of adventure. And so at this point, I was like, what did I get myself into? So to calm myself down, what I tried to do was go back and look at, okay, what's been done in the past with this really short play? Mm-hmm. And the first thing I thought back to was an article that Mike Merles wrote, Legends and Lore article, about the 1-hour adventure. And I'm like, perfect, 1-hour adventure. Let's read this. So what he basically said was, in the in the ramp up to D&D Next and then 5th edition, he and the other people at Wizards, and a lot of us actually, went back and played all the old editions to see what we liked best about them. So his article was about playing basic D&D and having a full adventure, including making characters, in an hour. And that he wanted 5th edition, whatever it looked like after D&D Next was over, to be able to support that kind of experience. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. I can start with this. So then I went and looked at the feedback that his article had gotten. Now, it is the internet, and it is gamers.
So you had to filter a little bit.
Well, it ran the gamut of, okay, that would be really cool, to, if this is what 5th edition is going to be like, I'm going to quit D&D, sell all my dice. But in that spectrum of feedback, there were some good, interesting points. So using all of that, I then said, well, okay, has this been done in the past? And really, it kind of had with the D&D Encounters program. Because if you remember D&D Encounters, it started in 2010, 4th edition days, and it was go to your game store, play for between an hour and 2 hours, get your fix of D&D in, and then go and come back the next week and continue the story. So there were some lessons to be learned from that. It was a different edition. It was 4th edition, and it was a little longer play time, but okay. So I went back and I started with Eric Scott DeBee's Hallister's Lost Apprentice, which was the first one, and started reviewing those to see what worked and what didn't in all of those, because it was meant to teach new players, just like I was going to have to do. It was meant to kind of introduce people to organized play, which I was going to have to do. So I went that route. And then I thought even further back, for 3rd edition, at big conventions like Origins or Gen Con or Winter Fantasy, WotC would run what they call the Delve.
Right.
And it was between 1 and 2 hours where you'd go. There was really no story except for, hey, there's a cave and there's stuff you can collect in the cave, so go.
Right.
And it would be, 3 encounters, see how far you could get. A lot of times you'd get a token for each encounter you did, and then you'd turn in the token for some real-life swag. So I looked at all of those and then finally said, okay, other people have done something like this. Now I think I can handle it. So that was all of the research that went into that. Now I'm going to sit down and see what I can do. So when I started writing, the first thing I did was, okay, what is an adventure? If we're going to run a 1 hour adventure, what needs to be involved? And I just kind of broke it down to see if you can get in the 3 pillars of play: combat, exploration, and what they were calling interaction, which they've now decided to call role playing. So combat, exploration, role playing. Give the adventure a beginning, some sort of hook that gives them a goal. Go through interacting, combating, role playing, and then have a resolution, a denouement, if you will, and leave with some sort of reward for completing that goal. The reward could just be, job well done, here's some XP, here's some gold, here's a magic item, but something that felt like something was completed. Didn't have to wrap up a whole mystery, but you got to the goal that you had started with. So with that definition in mind, I started focusing then on, okay, what were my limiting factors? Because anybody who's done any sort of writing knows if you're staring at a blank page or a blank screen and you don't set yourself any limits, you're lost in a vast sea of white. So what I did was, okay, what are my limits? 1 hour, all right, 5 linked but not necessarily in order adventures. D&D Adventures League legal. I was also asked to, in each one of the 5 mini adventures, introduce one of the factions. So the Harpers, Emerald Enclave, etc.
Do they all do that, or just that first set?
The first set does that.
Right.
Then I said, okay, let's at least try to really delve into 2 of the 3 pillars in each one. So maybe one would be combat and exploration. One might be combat and role playing. One might be interaction, role playing, interaction, and exploration. And if I get 3 in, great. If I can just focus on 2 well, we'll do that. Then I thought, okay, new players and possibly new DMs. So let's kind of make it simple. Let's not try to get too fancy with everything. Maybe pick one really cool thing that the DM can ham up, like a really funny NPC or a weird monster, or a cool effect that the players could interact with. But just try to make it one cool thing.
Is one of those like giving birth to a demon goat?
That would be yes. That
That's
would
an
be
example
one of those
one.
things.
Okay.
Yep. That was in the
Most
third.
horrifying scene in any 1 hour D&D game I ever played.
I tried.
Yeah.
And then I thought, okay, let's see if I can even get it focused down even closer. So I said, okay, there's 5 adventures. There's 5 chromatic dragons, and this was the Horde of the Dragon Queen season. So let's focus on a color or a dragon, like black dragon, red dragon. Take each one and focus on that color as a theme.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tried to just keep pushing it down and down and down until I was in such a small space that it was very easy to fill that space.
Right.
Because I had all of those things. And if you have any literary bent whatsoever, Edgar Allan Poe had a theory called unity of effect, which is if you're writing a short story, every single word in that story should be pushing toward the one goal you have in mind for that story, whether it be horror or mystery or whatever. And that includes the words you use poetically or, the images you bring up. So I thought, okay, let's really tighten it down. Start from there and then go. So that was where I started with that first adventure. And I've kind of been using that as a pattern for the next 4 I wrote after that.
Right. And when you say adventure, you like that adventure was actually 5 of these 1 hour things.
Exactly.
And you've done how many now? 5 total?
I've done 5 for the Adventurers League that launched 5 seasons. Right. I did one called In Volo's Wake where I had Monica Valentinelli and Rich Lescouflair working with me to write 6 of them. But it was the same kind of concept, a short adventure that ties into Volo's Guide to Monsters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. So, so you talked about managing the 3 pillars. Are any of those pillars easier to work with in a 1 hour game, and are any particularly difficult?
Honestly, the easiest one to work with for me is combat.
Yeah,
because D&D has such a long, rich tradition of combat, and that's what I would say a majority of the people going into the game expect that and know the most about that.
Right.
They know that, okay, you roll dice and you hit things and you're trying to roll high. And so all of those things, it's just a matter of, well, it's like with 5th edition now. You could go back and play an AD&D adventure and it's pretty similar. You don't really have to change too much.
Right.
The monsters line up pretty well.
Right.
So that's kind of the easiest thing to do. Trying to get a cool interaction or trying to get cool exploration, that is a little bit harder to do and harder to make new with each iteration of an adventure.
Yeah.
There's only so many runes up on the wall that you fiddle with that you can make cool.
Evil pillars.
Yeah, exactly.
The staple in my game, the evil pillar.
Exactly. The pillars, the altar, it's...
In your head, do you sort of have an idea about how much time combat is typically going to take now in 5e?
Yeah, when I did the original adventure for those first 5 missions, I play tested at least 3 times with all of them with different groups with a stopwatch.
Yeah,
and wow. Literally it was go.
It's a good scientific approach.
Hit go and then start and play. Yeah. And, some groups I played with were super serious. So I knew, okay, these guys are going to get through it faster than this group that goofs off. But, you're going to get that when you run it at a convention too. So I would tweak here and there. And after that first run, I pretty well know that I can get 3 combats in 1 hour adventure if they're simple, straightforward fights. If you start throwing in doing interaction during the fight, like you're fighting, but you're also trying to, take down the cursed pillars.
Yeah, right. Now you got
then you maybe can only get 1 or 2 combats in, but you're also getting in that interaction part of the game as well.
Right. So it's interesting because I would think that my reaction is that combat is the hardest to manage because it feels like it's the most time consuming, and some of that is I've still got the scars from 4E where like there was no way to fit combat and anything else into an hour.
Right, and that's
like, I mean, people argue about that all the time. Oh no, 4E was just fine and it was very fast, and I'm like, really? Like my battles always took a long time.
Yeah, and when you write something, you really have to give everything over to the DM and say, here's my user manual for this adventure that I'm handing to you, Mr. DM. You use your tools to make it fit.
Right. So for a DM that's actually that wants to run, we'll stick to the focus of a 1 hour game, but I'm hoping for things that are useful for anybody that's kind of running a time constrained game, and particularly a time constrained game that's short. Like it's not a 5 hour game. What do you think are some of the key things that a DM needs to keep in mind to be able to keep the flavor of D&D and make sure that it still feels like a fun D&D game, but also stick to that time?
The first thing that you need to do is get the players to understand, especially if they're used to 4 hour games, this is a 1 hour game. So while we're going to do all the cool things, you're not going to get that exact same experience.
Right.
If you can at least, even if they don't understand what that means, if you can at least say, this is going to be different, usually people are fine with it. You're always going to get the people like, I didn't get a chance to blank. No, you didn't. But this is a 1 hour game. So start with that buy-in. But after that, it's all about pacing. What I will do is I will start, if I'm DMing a 1 hour game, I will start sitting down. The first thing I will do is take control of the table. I will be the first one to speak at the table. And it will usually be some sort of...
Good luck with that.
Well, I mean, there's people chatting. But then it will be like, oh, hey, thanks for coming. Thanks for playing. If we're at Gen Con, can everybody give me your tickets? Right. Oh, and here's this form to fill out. Start by taking control of the action around the table.
Right. Interesting.
And then you at least... I mean, it's the same thing if you're in business and you're running a meeting, or if you're a teacher and you're teaching a class. You become the biggest personality at the table just to start with, so everyone knows that they're focused on you.
In a D&D game, that's pretty tough.
Well, it is.
There's a lot of personalities around that table.
Yeah, and it's okay though if somebody at the table has a bigger personality than you, as long as they are focused the way they should be on keeping the game moving forward, that's fine. Then you can step back a little and let that person share the pacing with you, as long as they are moving at the pace the game needs to go. So that's the first thing. Take control of the table. I'm not a person that likes to do that. I would rather sit back and listen to other people talk. But I know if I'm going to get this game over in 50 minutes,
right, it's way more critical.
Yep, I've got to be that person.
Yeah, interesting.
And then I will start usually by sitting down and starting the game, reading the little box text slowly, calmly. And then as the game goes on, as we get to more exciting or interesting parts of combat, I start to talk faster, and I might stand up. And now I'm up and I'm moving at the table and everyone's looking at me. And so they're getting the idea that, okay, everything was relaxed, but now we're going to pick up the pace.
Right.
And they usually follow that lead, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. So it's important to, and then you get through the first combat. Say there's 2 combats in the adventure. You get through that first combat, then sit back down. You slow down again. Now they're going to explore. So, smooth it out a little, talk a little slower. They get the idea that, okay, now the frenetic part is over. Now we get to look around. And so just by your actions and your voice, if you talk high and fast, everyone's going to be excited. And then
full of anxiety.
Your voice and talk slower. They're
like dog owners, right?
Exactly.
Dogs always act like the owner acts. If the owner's like, watch out for my dog. My dog gets really excited. Like, really? I wonder why that is.
Yeah, I can't imagine. No, but so it's you have these tools of just motion. If you're moving around and talking with your hands versus slowing down and sitting down, and then you can control the pace that way. You need to grab a drink.
I'll talk. Yeah, so that whole idea of using your body language to maintain the pacing is something I had never really thought of. I mean, I've thought of the idea of like standing, for a couple of reasons. I've heard people that talk about presentations and speech and voice projection in general, that when you're standing, you're much stronger than you're sitting. I think some old business book talked about, like, if you ever have an important phone call, stand while you're doing it, and people on the other end can actually tell.
Well, I'm standing right now. Are
you really? You're standing? That's not me. Yeah. I couldn't be more laid back. I don't have the right pacing for this conversation. If I stood, you'd just be staring at my chest, and that's not very, photogenic. So, but that idea of actually managing the pacing by body language, standing during the exciting parts, speeding up tone of voice, and then when the pace dips back down again, sitting down, extending, speaking a little bit more slowly and deliberately. That's really interesting. I'd never really thought of it like that.
And obviously you can use that in any sort of game, but it's more important to do it in a very short game where you need the players to be focused.
Right.
And you can also bring players into that pacing ritual by letting them be in charge of initiative, or putting them in charge of certain aspects of the game that maybe normally you as the DM would do. Because that just keeps them a little bit more focused.
Yeah. Letting players. There's a bunch of little dirty tricks that I've either talked about or tried over the years, and not all of them stick. But one of them that has stuck completely is having players do initiative. I always at my Sunday game, there's one person who has now accepted responsibility for doing initiative. Period. It's just like it's been his job now for for a year. At my other game, I kind of hold it up, and whoever's somebody will finally go, okay, I'll do initiative.
And what I've done too is if I sit down at the table, I know I have 1 hour and that's it. And I look and one guy's on his phone or doing something else, or he's probably going to be the one who slows things down. Ask him to do initiative.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I do that with skill checks too. Yep. If I see somebody that's reaching for their phone or that's on their phone, that's when their character's the one that's got to discover something interesting.
Yep.
And I'll say, hey, Ryu, why don't you roll a skill check for me? As you're studying a statue in the corner, it suddenly dawns on you that you're staring at a statue that might be 30,000 years old and tell you something about the war between giants and dragons. Blah, 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 blah.
And that actually goes to another thing about pacing, which is avoid dice rolling.
Oh yeah.
Unless it's super important. If there's that DC 10 history check to know something about the statue,
right?
Don't make people roll that. Just give it to them, and that's on the writer generally. If you're writing a very short adventure, just give them the history.
Right.
Just unless it's super important and you really want to reward someone for having a super high history, just give it to them.
That's interesting. That's one. So I've heard that advice a fair bit, or a number of times as well. The whole if it's lower than if it's a low, either a couple circumstances. One is if it's a crucial piece of information, don't hide it behind a die check. And the other one is, and if it's relatively low, don't bother with the die check. Just tell them. The one thing though is almost in the same vein as using there's the DM using their body language to maintain a pace. I always feel like if they're rolling dice, they're doing something that's D&D like. That's the one thing I could get them to do with their hands that's different than working on their phones. So I'd probably overdo it. I probably ask for die rolls more often than most. It's hard to, I can't do a scientific survey of that. But, it feels like I do die rolling a lot. And many times it's like I don't really it feels relatively quick to me because it's pretty fast for them to look at their skill and figure out what the check was.
Sometimes.
I guess, right. There's a lot of times where I'll say okay, who's got the highest history? And then everybody has to do a big survey of the table and figure out who's got a history. Right. And then I'll say, okay, so you got the highest history, but is anybody else talking to you about this? And then someone else says, yeah, she and I'll talk about it. And I say, okay, that gives you advantage on the roll. And then there's always no, you don't have to roll. Only they have to roll, and they roll twice, which I seem to have to clarify. It's the one weird rule about 5e and advantage and aiding somebody is that the aider doesn't do anything, and they want to do something. They want to roll a die. And
exactly.
Yeah, I don't know. But so it's interesting on the idea that it's particularly. I think this is really a solid difference between a 1 hour game and a longer game. That in a 1 hour game, that's valuable time. If you did a lot of those, and every one of those took an extra, couple minutes. Well, those couple minutes are a significant percentage of your overall game.
Precisely.
So that's very interesting.
Yep. And the final way that just came to me to help pace a game, and the writer needs to be the one to do this to help the DM, is to put a PC, or I'm sorry, an NPC in there somewhere who the DM can use to help regulate the party's pace through the game. So, if you're the DM and you don't have that, you might just have to say, okay, well then you have to move into the next room because we've only got 10 minutes left and there's a combat there. Whereas if there's an NPC that they can use as a DM, now you're in the story rather than meta. You're saying, and the gnome that's with you just takes off into that room.
Right.
What do you do?
Yeah.
So you're starting them along rather than having to, look at your watch and.
Yeah, I always had. So I've run I didn't do it this last year for obvious reasons, but in previous years on Halloween I run Curse of Strahd, or I'm sorry, I run Ravenloft. Next year I'll be running Curse of Strahd, or later this year I guess. And that's one where it's like if I'm going to run a 5-hour version of Ravenloft, I've got to keep it really tight and short. And one of my rules is Strahd's going to show up a half hour before the game ends. And I tell him I'm like, Strahd's showing up in 3.5 hours. You know this, right? You can feel it. He told you this, right? And then throughout I'll be like, oh, Strahd's coming. And they're like, oh, And I remember I ran one game and they were literally just kicking doors down to try to get to the last item they needed to fight him. And there was all this story and all this plot in each room, and they just ran through it. So they kick a door open, and here's this woman that's pulls the bed sheets up around her, like, hey, have you seen this sword? This supposed to be a sword. She's like, I didn't see a sword. She's like, all right, never mind. It just leaves.
Yeah.
So that urgency, putting the sense of urgency, the need of urgency into the characters.
Yep.
In story, right? So they know you have this candle and the candle is burning out. And if it burns out, the demons are going to descend upon you before you're able to screw at the 4 evil pillars.
Right. And you start with that urgency right in the story hook, whatever your hook is.
Right. Yeah.
It's not, it's not this guy hires you and now you have a day to go buy equipment and go ask questions. It's you see someone and there's an emergency and you have to go right now.
Right.
Because
So one other question, and then I want to grab some questions from our readers here. I forgot to mention that Alex Basso, our guardian angel, is also here in the channel. He's the one that's chatting with folks in the chat channel and will be selecting the questions that we talk about in a bit. Alex, jump in anytime. Say hello if you want to. If you don't,
hello.
No big.
How's it going,
there
everyone?
he is. The invisible guardian angel.
Always
So one last question that I had, because I always love this idea. Like you go to all of these conventions and you go to the pit and you see people, half a dozen DMs that are running your stuff right there, right? And you're walking around watching them run it. What do they do that drives you kind of crazy? What do you wish they would do that you don't generally see them doing? Besides winning your beautiful prose, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the first two are taking control of the table.
Yeah.
And not being the biggest personality at the table.
Those are things that they're not. Yeah, they're not taking control of the table like they should.
Yeah, and really the thing that drives me the most crazy is when they don't do what they want to do rather than running what I wrote.
Yeah.
because they are sitting there with the 6, 5, 4, 7 players, and they know what these people want. And just because I wrote that this NPC says this doesn't mean that NPC has to say that. Right. Just because I wrote that there are X number of monsters does not mean that the DM can't take away or add monsters. Because I'm just the playwright. They're the director.
Right.
And they know their audience better than I know their audience.
Right.
And there are as many ways to play D&D as there are players in the world. I don't care if a DM skips every combat and just runs a full role-playing session. Hopefully, I have given them enough grist for their role-playing mill to do that if that's what those players want. That's the gift I want to give writers when I DM their stuff, is no matter what it says on the page, if those players walk away happy, they think that writer has written the best adventure ever. So I hope and I pray that the DM will use what I wrote as much as possible, but then do what they need to do. They're there.
This is a really so that's a really interesting topic into itself. Like I've every adventure writer that I've talked to, and in many adventures that I've read, like in the text of the adventure, it says like it essentially gives the I think it was George Orwell who said, right, avoid any of these rules rather than do anything outright barbarous, right? And it's this like this recognition that, look, I'm just saying a bunch of nonsense in here. You're sitting in that chair with 6 people in front of you that you got to entertain. Do whatever you need to do with this, right? Tear it apart, throw the whole thing away, whatever you need to do. Take, and still there's a reluctance. And even, I both write adventures and run adventures. And I still find myself like, yeah, I'm running Storm King's Thunder and I'm kind of taking it my own way, but Perkins sure spent a lot of work, doing it this way. Maybe I really ought to, and then I'm like, I just hate this anyway. I'm still not going to do it that way, right?
Yeah.
And so I've kind of gotten over that, but most of that is just because of ego, right? I'm like, I'm smart and I can run great D&D adventures. But I know a lot of people who don't. I have to tell you a story because it was one of your adventures. I was at Gen Con, I think, a couple years ago playing them, and it was one of the last games of the event, and it was a 1-hour game, and we're playing it, and it was a great big room with like 4 cauldrons of fire, and you had to like knock the cauldron of fire to light the torch underneath or something like that.
Right.
And the DM was just not giving it to us at all. And we're like running around this hall, getting our asses kicked by whatever monster was in there. And the monster felt tough. We're like level 1, right?
Right.
And the monster felt really tough. And people are dropping and barely getting back on their feet. And people are doing heal checks to try to get people on. And we're running around hitting these baskets. And the DM was just like the opposite of the body language was the exact opposite. Like if there had been a cot, he would have been lying down on it to sleep. And granted, it was his last adventure of a weekend. God knows how many slots he ran. But I remember like every time we were clearly like just aggravated. Like I'm just mad and I'm just like, I'm not going to, like, we literally had to roll like a 19 or a 20 on our check to be able to roll this thing. And I'm like, and in my mind, I'm thinking like, he can change this anytime he wants. And he can just come up with any reason he wants for us to be able to knock this thing off. And we all came up with like crazy ideas about stuff we were going to do. And everyone's like, no, sorry, that's not how it works. And I was like, man, and he kept like kind of waving and gesturing at the adventure every time we would try something. And I was like, I'm mad at him because I know, of course, look, if nobody at this table is having fun, just let us do it, right? And then I'm mad at the adventure because I'm like, what kind of jerk adventure has this skill check? And then later I read it and it wasn't anything like he ran it. It was totally better. And even in the event, I'm like, not only was he was playing to a bad adventure that was in his head. So it's like one of the weirdest situations I've seen of somebody supposedly playing it by the book. Yeah. When he wasn't, and it was a worse experience for everybody. But I blamed that on the fact that it was, probably 20 hours he'd been running in the last 3 days, whatever.
Those last slots especially on like late Saturday, early Sunday, are brutal for everyone involved.
If we had handed him a pillow, that'd have been it. Had to sleep. So we're going to take some questions from the folks that have been watching on the Twitch channel and anybody that's happened to post any notes on Twitter. Alex, what have you got for us?
Okay, so first, this one's from MJS October. Would you have an upper limit to party level or monster CR for a 1 hour adventure?
That's a good question.
That is a great question. Every one that I've written so far for the Adventures League has been for first through fourth level characters. Starting in an upcoming season, we're going to try them at tier 2.
Cool.
So
that's
there
5,
will be
5
some.
to 10.
Yeah. So I wouldn't go past 10, and I am in that fear zone right now of what's going to happen, even at 5th level, because once you hit 5th level, you have spells that can change the way things
Fireball
work.
changes everything.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, Fireball's also really quick.
This is true.
It's summoned woodland beings that causes real trouble.
Right. Now, that doesn't mean a more skilled writer than I couldn't pull it off at 20th level. It's always go back to those pillars, and does combat at that level bog down to the point where you can't get through a 1 hour, a 1 hour combat. Depends on the monsters you throw at them, I guess. If you just let them do a cakewalk, at that level, everything's a cakewalk for 20th level.
I was going to say, I don't know how you do a 1 hour challenge against 20th level PCs. Yeah. Unless it's an evil pillar.
Yeah. But you could definitely do some sort of exploration role-playing thing in an hour, for sure. At pretty much any level, depending on how you configured it.
I mean, that's sort of Tomb of Horrors is sort of like that, right? Where Tomb of Horrors was written by Gygax as a tournament adventure, where he's like, I don't care what you bring to the table. If you stick your arm in a black hole, that arm is gone, right? And so it can be a challenge because it really doesn't matter what your characters do. It doesn't matter what powers they've got. Like, getting run over by a juggernaut is still getting run over by a juggernaut.
Right. And if you set them a goal at the start of the hour and you give them a significant barrier to completing that goal, and they are able to overcome that barrier within the hour, you've just had an adventure. Right. So I would say I'm going to be learning a lot about that in the next couple of months.
So you wrote it for 5 to 10. You've already.
It has not been written yet, so that's why I'm still in terrified mode.
Yeah, right. I'm always in that mode. So, especially if I had your to-do list. So, do you just to kind of follow up on that? When you're looking at designing it for 5 to 10, are you changing? Do you have kind of components of the adventure that you're changing because of the fact that they're that level, or are you running it pretty much the same with the general, same general ideas?
I'm gonna have to do some play tests because now the combat thing is going to be a question for me.
Right.
So if you're just doing first level through fourth level, you can pretty much do a simple combat in 15-20 minutes easily. Even a hard combat with lots of moving parts you can get through in 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. If I'm looking at 10th level characters, I have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I'd be very interested to hear how that works.
Me too.
So you, yeah, right. Alex, what else you got? That's a good question.
Yeah, it was.
So one to follow that up, also on comment, is what are some ways to quickly end a combat if time is running out?
Oh, I have opinions about this, but you go first.
Well, I want to hear your opinions first.
I absolutely effing hate it when DMs say, we're going to call the battle right here. It drives me. It is, of the things I see at Adventurers League and the things that I see as a player playing at organized play games, it to me is a disease that needs to be rooted out and killed. Because nothing breaks my immersion faster than the DM stepping out of the camera, usually at the middle part of where the peak of the battle is just breaking out of, oh man, we're in real trouble, and just turning into that awesome slide down of us just dominating a fight. That seems to be right when the DM says, we're just going to call right here. And on a personal level, like, I've had it where they almost always seem to do it right when it was my turn on the second round, right when I was about to do something good. Mm-hmm. Now, I get that, like, there's a need sometimes to shorten up a battle, especially when you have a time frame. But there seems like there's a lot of good tricks for ending the battle early, but still keeping it in the narrative of the game. Monsters running is usually not the best one because characters always want to chase their asses across whatever field. But just turning them into minions, giving them one hit point, and the next hit that hits them kills them. Easiest way in the world to end a battle and still, still stay in the narrative of the game. But when they break the narrative of the game to end a battle early, it just drives me bananas.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't like it. I've done it, but I don't like it either when the DM just says, "Well, we're going to call it here," and then nothing else comes of it.
Right, and then it's like, now room 2.
Well, yeah. So just in the narrative, say, "All right, so within the next, 20 seconds, you are able to take out the rest of the goblins.
Right.
Did you want to capture any, or did you want to kill them?
Right. Right.
Then turn it into an interaction or role playing rather than just a metagame stop.
Right.
I have had monsters turn on other monsters.
Yeah.
There's 2 monsters left. It's this one's turn. Obviously, the characters are going to win. So the one goblin turns to the other and shoots him in the head and kills him, and then says, "I didn't like him anyway.
Right.
Hey, will you let me live?
Yeah, right.
I'll tell you where this trap is.
I'm actually a different spy."
So, do something different, but make it an interaction and a role playing experience rather than a metagame move out of it.
Right. Right. I always feel like the one final hit. It takes slightly longer than saying we're going to call it right here, but it usually happens really quickly. And you can even sort of telegraph it to the players of like, these guys are right on the edge. You think one more hit's going to do it. And that way they're not wasting their time into positioning and everything else.
Yep, exactly.
And they still get to finish it off. Yeah. But,
and if there's a trap in the room that no one's seen yet, the monster walks into the trap.
Right. Good one. Yeah.
Yeah. Use whatever you have going on in the room to.
Yeah. Some other environment, another, the wall collapses on him and kills him.
Right.
Like, whoa.
The
evil pillar eats them.
He swings and he misses so badly, the sword comes around, hits himself in the face with it, and kills him. Anything funny or different or weird to tell the story without breaking the story is good. That's another great question, by the way.
Yeah, really good one. Alex, what else you got?
Okay. So one from Johnny Utah 99. He wants to know, how do you politely deal with talkative players when time is a factor?
That's a good one.
Ooh, politely? I don't know about politely.
Shut the F up.
And I will usually just give that character. It depends on how they're talkative. If they're talkative in the game, completing the story, that's one thing. You can use that to focus toward moving toward the end of the game. If they're talkative outside of game, they're chatting with their buddies or something, then it's just keep. Okay, could you hand me that die? Roll a die in their direction. Could you hand me that die? Thank you. That brings attention back to you. Hey, could you give me an intelligence check? They roll. It doesn't matter what they get. Okay, thanks. Right, just bring them back into the game somehow. If those little tricks don't work, if just catching their attention and bringing them back to the game doesn't work, then it's time to say, we only have 30 minutes to get through this. I'm fine not getting through it if you guys are fine not getting through it. Usually that's enough.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't care if they get through it or not. Sometimes they're just like, hey, we're having fun. Okay, I'll have fun too. I've got 30 minutes. I can do anything you guys want. And that's at a convention where, someone's paying at Gen Con almost $100 for a badge and, $10 for a ticket. It's our money. I can juggle. I can do whatever they like.
Right.
If that's not what they want to do. Now, if you have a table that's split, then you get into some weird dynamics where you're just pulling out all the tricks to try to get everyone together.
Yeah.
What do you think, Mike?
I mean, I think in like all those suggestions are good, and usually sort of making it clear that okay, we're going to bring it back into the world, usually does the trick. Sometimes if somebody's really in there, I'll just say, I want can we give everybody else a chance at this point? I want to make sure everyone gets a chance, and usually they get the idea. Oh, okay, I should shut up. I don't think I've had a situation where I've run it where I had where I've really had a player that was, kind of dominated to the point where I had to, take him aside and say, please, shut up. I've had players, well, they kind of interrupt a lot, and my way is to just ignore the interruption and focus on whatever I was doing ahead of time, right? Like if somebody's in the middle of a scene and they're talking and this person interrupts them, I'm still paying attention to the person who's talking, and I'm ignoring whatever the interruption was.
Right.
But sometimes that doesn't work so well.
My home game group is the absolute worst. I have never had a convention table of strangers worse than they are.
Yeah.
They just, we could get like Curse of Strahd done in a night, but it ends up being 6 hours and we're still in the same room we started in, because these guys are just all over the place. But it's Friday night, we're blowing off steam. That's cool. So I've learned a lot from dealing with them.
Yeah, your thing about like they're the one that paid $100 for their badge and $10 for the ticket. I always feel the same way about any game I'm running. Like everyone is sacrificing time to be at the table. This is my whole cell phone rant, right? Everyone is sacrificing time at the table, and if they want to spend 2 hours playing an iPhone game, hanging around with the other people, who am I to say no, right? Like they're not my employee, right? Like I'm not paying them to be there. So if they want to spend 2 hours on the phone, I mean, I'll try to bring it back. But I'm not gonna, and if that somehow is hindering the game, I'll do something that I can to try to keep him involved. I've had a situation where like the person who was in the best opportunity to do a skill check is the one that's totally not paying attention, and then you kind of say like, hey, does Rild want to handle this? Oh yeah, Rild's really good at Arcana checks, right?
Yep.
But I don't get mad because it's not.
Yeah, to be honest,
I don't feel like I think it's too much of a demand on them to say like, not only are you going to spend 2 hours and God knows how much time driving over here and everything else, but you have to play it the way I want to play it. I mean, they can play however they want.
Yeah,
I don't think that's a commonly held position. I don't know if it's common or not, but I know lots of people who have sort of a cell phone plan. They have like the jar from Sons of Anarchy where everybody goes in the room and they put the phone in the jar.
There you go.
Right. And I could see that too. I could see if people wanted to run it. And if the whole table agreed that, look, I think we'll all have more fun if we kind of separate ourselves from our devices, I think that works out. We're totally answering a different question that was asked.
Yeah.
Alex, what else you got?
Okay. One from MJS October. Do you use any devices at the table to help run? And if you do, what's your favorite app to help you during a 1 hour adventure?
That's a good question. Yeah,
it is a great question. I'm the worst person to answer because I use paper and real dice and real pencils. I have started just now using an iPad because I got one of the big iPads, so it's easier to read. But I still will just have the adventure there, and then all the other papers, monster stats, and so on on the table. Now I know that if I put my mind to it, I could start using some apps that would really probably help me. I love to see Chris Perkins run. He was running at Origins, and he had a spreadsheet up, and he was had everybody's AC, and it was doing an initiative that way. And I'm like, man, that would be so cool to do that. But I just don't want to spend the time to figure out how to make that work the best way.
Sure.
Since I have paper, so I'm not a good person to answer that.
Oh, those are good points, right? You've run a lot of 1 hour games, and if that's what works for you, then that's what works for you.
And to be honest, at some point I don't even look at the adventure.
Well, yeah, especially if it's yours, right?
Yeah. I'm just gonna make it up anyway.
20 hours on that thing. I don't need to look at it. Yeah. I don't. Yeah, so I don't run 1 hour games. I don't know if I've ever run a 1 hour game, but I've certainly run my share of 2 hour games. My Sunday game is always 2 hours. And I still love the paper books myself. I keep my regular source books on hand. I'd say 3 tools that I've used that have helped me considerably with speed. One is, and we've talked about this with Teos on the last DM deep dive, are the numbered initiative cards. 3x5 cards folded in half with a number 1 through 8. And when you're doing initiative, again, if you have a player who's doing it, they just hand those cards out in initiative order. It sits out in front of everybody. So I find it to be better than a DM-held initiative sheet where the DM is the only one that can see it. If the players can look over and say, oh, he just called for number 4 and I'm number 5, I better get ready. when that works well, it works really well. The other tool I use for one-shot games, I use it actually for all my games, and I mentioned it again, is I have a campaign worksheet that I put together as part of my Fantastic Locations Kickstarter, which has the names of the players, the names of the characters, background, race, class, background information on it, a little set of random names so that I can look for random names, a tiny little cheat sheet of status conditions and basic stats, like basic 5e stats. What's the range for DCs? How many targets can fit into a fireball typically, because I play a lot of Theater of the Mind combat, stuff like that. And then an area for notes. And when I'm running the game, I can just fill that with everything. And by having all the character names on that list, it's very quick for me to say, okay, so-and-so, because I always like to use the character's name when I'm addressing anybody. That works really well. And it's nice to have. It's just a single 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, real easy to use and works well for fast games. For apps, the one app I'll promote is a app called Fight Club 5. I think it's made by a company called the Lion's Den for iOS, and it is a really, really fast app. It's got the SRD material and the 5e SRD material in it, and you can very quickly look up spells, monsters, classes, items, magic items, and all sorts of stuff. It's got a really nice quick search. It's all formatted really well. So when I'm on the road and I don't want to carry around a whole book, I'll just bring that app, and I could run D&D forever with just that app and just the SRD material. So that's a real good one, and very very simple to use. Alex, what else we got?
Okay, another one from MJS October. How do you handle rule checks during the 1 hour? Do you warn up front that the DM flat takes precedence?
Good question.
Yeah, what I generally say is I don't know all the rules. I generally know the rules I need to know, but I don't necessarily know the rules that you need to know, such as spells. So if you do something and I make a ruling and it's wrong, tell me. We will move forward based on a group decision, and then someone who's not up next can look it up in their player's handbook or on their iPhone or wherever they check their rules, and that generally keeps things moving pretty quickly.
Yeah, I back in the 4E days, I did this where I had an assigned rules lawyer for our group, right? And it was just easier to say, when it comes to a rules arbitration, they're in charge, and as long as they're fair about it, right? They don't cheat, and they don't do it in favor of any one particular group. And usually the rules lawyer is far more interested in maintaining the integrity of the rules than they are on being biased towards either the DM or the player. So that can work. And even if you have a group of people that don't know each other, usually somebody's willing to fill that in. There's almost somebody that's pretty experienced.
Right.
I think it brings up an interesting point overall. I've heard this with 5e, that like the monsters will often have spells listed in the monster stat block, but we don't actually know what they are. And in the old days of 4e, we could look in the stat block and it usually described what it was. Usually it was something unique to the monster, but also was very similar. So now we might have a monster that just says fireball as an option, for example. But one of the things that's interesting is the longer we play 5e, the more of those rules we learn. Right. And I don't think we account for that all the time with when we think about these things. We kind of pretend like I should have learned all of the rules on the first day and I will never learn another rule ever since. It's like, no, we're all getting better at this. Like, right. You might not remember that a fireball is 8d6, your first day, but boy, I sure know it is now because I've seen about 1,000 fireballs. Right. And right. Most of the spells I'm picking up, like the ranges I typically don't remember. But dice and stuff like that, it's pretty quick for me to remember it. And I think as players are playing more, they're going to remember it. And it's less of a worry about, do we remember, all the rules? But yeah, when it comes to rules arbitration, I think, the asking around the table, I don't know. Does anybody else know how Thunderstrike, how I don't even know the name of the spell, how
Thunderwave?
Yeah. Does anybody else know what Thunderwave does? What the area of effect for Thunderwave is? And somebody will be like, oh yeah, it's a 15-foot cone, right. But they might not remember that, So then sometimes you just look it up. But again, with a 1 hour game, I suppose it's very different,
Yeah.
You might just not have time for people to flip through their PHP.
Yeah, what I do with monsters is I love the 4th edition monster, and I hate having to look up spells, so I just make things up. This guy has a 2nd level spell slot. He doesn't have Magic Missile listed. He has Magic Missile now.
Yeah.
He casts it at 2nd level. Boom, there you go.
Yeah.
We're going to use a Thunder Wave-like spell now. And you can do that as long as you're not one of those DMs that's just out to kill people.
Right.
Or even worse, their characters.
What gives you the benefit? Yeah.
Right. Just make a fun story out of it. Don't overdo it. You know the general range of spells.
Right.
So, work from there.
Yeah. And that idea of like the more spells that like I have a feeling that we probably start to learn the more effective spells at any given spell level first. And then if you open it up and you're looking like, wow, here's a shaman, and this shaman's got 2nd level pre-spells, and I don't recognize any of these. Guess what? Spirit Guardians it is, because I know what Spirit Guardians does.
Right.
So, I think I like that idea a lot. I actually had a player who got really upset, not really upset, but definitely got miffed because I was changing out the spell loading for a wizard that was in a module, and he knew what spells the creature had. I was like, okay, I'm not an Excel spreadsheet. Like, guess what, pal? So I never forgot that. Alex, what else you got?
Let's see. Okay, so MJS October. What's the word length usually for a 1-hour adventure when you write it?
Ooh.
Word count.
Ooh. That is a great question. Let me see. I mean, a regular adventure is usually about 10,000 words.
Right.
So you're looking, sometimes these will be a little longer than just dividing 5 by 10. So I would say between 2,000 and 2,500 words.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're like I write for the Adventures League, so a lot of that is text that has to be there. It's not really the adventure. It's all of the, all of the disclaimers and so on. There's lots of text that's just, the character shall receive the following treasure divided amongst the party. Characters should attempt to divide treasure evenly whenever possible. All that stuff is just copy and paste each time. But what's critical about the word count is kind of like Poe's unity of effect. Don't use words in the adventure itself unless they mean something.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to keep my box text, which is very important to have for DMs that might not have prepped the adventure thoroughly. So you need that box text, but keep it simple, keep it to the point, say what needs to be said without having a lot of questions from the players or ways that they might go off in different directions. Just make it clear and to the point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's probably a difference between the word count for published adventures and what we need to be able to run one on our own. If we're running a short 1-hour game, I bet you could get away with a 3x5 card. And if on the assumption you've thought about it at all, you could probably get a 3x5 card in your head, and then play off of that, particularly for 1 hours in 1-hour games. I've done that for longer games, 4-hour games, if you've got enough material floating around in your brain.
Yep.
I was just looking at today. I was looking at Weird Discoveries, a book that Monty Cook put out for Numenera, and it's a book of 10 adventures for Numenera with a totally different kind of adventure design than the typical. And I think those are intended to be like good, solid 4-hour adventures. And I think they're a total of 4 pages, right? It's like they're really, really brief in their description. They have a map and then the descriptions of the places in the map. But they, and what I liked about it was, at breakfast, I was thinking like, there's a convention coming up. I was thinking like, should I run a Numenera game for this? And I was able to read all of the summaries for all 10 adventures in like 10 minutes, right. And decide like, I don't like this one. I don't like this one, and it was because like, here are the main things about this adventure. Here's how it starts. Here's, a little clue here. This happens, this happens, this,
right.
And very, very structured in its approach.
Yeah. And writing for the Adventurers League is a little bit of a different animal because while it doesn't have to be an exact copy of one table to the next, you kind of want to have a similar experience. So if the players do X, you want Y to happen at almost all the tables.
Right.
So you have to go at least deep enough to let the DM know that is what you're expecting the story to be based on player actions.
Right. One last question. I'm gonna ask it. How do you feel about flavor text?
Flavor text.
Read aloud text.
Read aloud text. I think it's vital, especially if you want, like I said, for organized play, it's very vital. For it's much easier for the DM to get across the atmosphere and the flow that you want by using sparingly but efficiently box text. I try to keep it to 3 short paragraphs, and I'm like looking at this adventure right now, and it's like 3 short paragraphs, next 3 short paragraphs, next 2 short paragraphs. So just enough that the DM will know and the players will know what things in the room they can interact with, or what information a non-player character is trying to get to them. Anything beyond that is too much. Don't use the word "you" in your box text, because inevitably, if you use the word "you," you're going to tell someone what their character does, or what their character feels.
Right.
So just say, instead of saying "you," as you walk across the room, you notice this, and a shiver goes up your spine. No. First of all, they might not have a spine.
Don't tell me what's going on with my spine.
Exactly. Yeah. So just say the statue in the corner, the eyes in the statue in the corner glint with a faint magical light, rather than you see or. Yeah. And it makes it a little bit more awkward, but if you can eliminate you, you're in good shape.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, to me, the topic of read aloud text comes up often, and it, like, looking at Wizards, look at the material from WotC. It's kind of like sometimes they have it and sometimes they don't. And I think they probably have some sort of style guide that they use to decide when do you need it and when should you not. Right. I've always decided, like, look, I barely read your stuff anyway. It'd be really nice if you had that in there. Why do I have to read this whole section and then summarize it? Why can't you just tell me what to say, right?
Yeah.
I paid my $50. Give me some read aloud text.
Yep. But I wrote an article on critical hits many years ago now. If you look up my name and critical hits in box text, I wrote a long article about it, including I thought it was funny because it's happened, scene where a DM is reading box text and the players keep interrupting, saying no. It's like, okay, you start to approach. No, we don't.
I don't approach.
Or your skin prickles with. No, I'm a warforged. I don't have skin. And so it's all of these pitfalls of box text done as kind of a play. So check that out if you get a chance, and hopefully there's some good advice in there too.
Shawn, this has been a great talk. It's always I was thinking about earlier today that, like, in at least 3 conventions I can think of, my deepest regret was that I didn't get to talk to you long enough, or at all in some cases. Like, I'm like, yeah, there he is, walking across the hall, and and then we both get swept up in the sea of convention stuff, and so it's been a great pleasure to spend an hour with you tonight and talk through all this stuff. I learned a lot. And I hope our viewers and listeners learned as well. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. It was great to be able to talk to you for a long time at Winter Fantasy and finally, get over that rut. But thanks for having me. I really loved your show. I hope I lived up to the what you've established with Teos and Enrique.
Yeah, I can't speak for everyone else, but I can speak for myself. I wouldn't put words in their mouth about what they do or aren't doing or thinking or not thinking.
There you go.
I certainly learned a lot and really liked it. So thank you very much. And thanks to Alex, our guardian angel, for wrangling the crowd. And thanks to everybody involved in the Don't Split the Podcast Network for doing all the hard work and letting 2 guys like us just sit and talk. It's been great. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody.
All right, thanks a lot, guys, for watching. Make sure to hit the follow button so you can get alerts whenever we go live. We'll be back next Wednesday with Adventure Maiden's special one-shot live stream. That'll be at 11:30 Eastern. Take care, everybody.